The Snake and the Rose. One hot day in high summer, Snake lay basking on the stone steps which led down to the garden. He lay uncurled at the top of the steps and listened to the chattering of the flowers. The marigolds were laughing prettily together, smiling their golden smiles. "Whoever heard of a snake falling in love with a rose? It's too absurd," said one to another. "He is a very handsome snake," said the forget-me-not wistfully, "in his shining silver armour." The pansy blinked her purple eye and gazed up at the rose bush, where a perfect rose, the colour of red velvet, blushed to scarlet hue and pretended not to hear what the other flowers were saying about her. "Hoity-toity," laughed the marigold. "She can afford to be with the snake at her beck and call, driving away all those nasty snails and slugs." The snake was indeed very much in love with the beautiful red rose, and all through the summer he had been protecting her. But as the sun's rays grew hotter and hotter, he found it more and more difficult to move. The flowers too began to wilt and hang their heads, and soon even the marigolds were silent. As dusk fell, the snake dragged himself to his hole in the wall and lay there, panting. His skin felt as dry as parchment paper. There was a click of the gate, and a woman from the house climbed down the steps with a watering can. She sprinkled the water over the heads of the marigolds, forget-me-nots, and pansies. Then she turned to the rose and gave her a cooling spray. The rose reached towards the drops of silver water, her petals forming a cup. When the woman returned to the house, the rose still held a pool of sparkling water. She called softly to the snake, who, sliding his body over the stones and sticks, came slowly to her. The snake drank and drank, and for a moment he rested his chin on the rose's diamond-spattered petals. From that time on, he loved her more than ever. Each day he would protect the rose, and each evening after foraging for food he would sleep by her, winding his silver body around the rosebush and resting his head on her petalled cheek. Then one evening the weather changed, and a chill wind blew. The snake, shivering a little, went as usual to see his rose. But she was not there. He searched high and low, but could not find her. A marigold, whose sleep he had disturbed, said crossly, "The woman from the house picked her. Taking her into a nice warm room, I shouldn't wonder. Some flowers have all the luck." The snake waited until all was still inside the house and the lights were switched off. Then he pushed his body up the steps, underneath the gate and along the pavement, until at last he came to the door. The door of the house had a gap at the bottom, and the snake wriggled through the gap and into the room on the other side. His soft belly felt the roughness of a carpet. On the table, in a blue vase, was the rose. She smiled to see him, and then wept a few petals onto the polished surface of the table. "How I wish that I was back with you in the garden," said the rose. I cannot breathe in here. The air is stifling. Soon all my petals will be gone." The snake did what he could to comfort her, but when daylight came, the rose begged him to leave. He promised to visit her every night and slipped back under the door. For 3 nights the snake visited the rose, and each time he saw her, she wept a few more petals. One morning, the woman from the house took what was left of the rose and threw her onto a mossy bank which lay between the bottom of the garden and a dark, mysterious wood. The snake slid down from his wall, crossed the garden, and gazed at the wrinkled, withered rose. He felt as if his heart would break. When night fell, he burrowed sadly under the moss and dead leaves, under the crumpled scarlet petals, and fell into a deep sleep, which was almost like death itself. The summer days had ended, and soon winter rains battered all the golden brown leaves from the trees. The chattering of the flowers had long ceased, and the chorus of birdsong gave way to the strange wild cry of the owl. Snow fell, layer upon layer, and the earth was hushed and still. When spring rains came, melting the snow, there was a stirring in the mossy bank between the garden and the wood. When the warm sun shone and flowers danced in the breeze, the snake came cautiously into the open again. He warmed himself on the stone slabs and listened to the cooing of the dove. The primroses talked to him, but still his heart was sad. Spring deepened into summer, and the snake went back to the rosebush. It was showing fresh green leaves now, and on the branch where his rose had been, a tiny bud was forming. The snake gazed at the bud longingly and whispered to it, but the bud did not reply. Day after day, the snake visited the rosebush, and one warm and glorious morning, the bud burst into petals of velvet red. Then the snake knew that after the long winter months, the rose had returned to him, and his heart was filled with happiness and joy.